After reviewing the basic principles of relative clauses and when relative pronouns can be omitted, let's take a look at two types of relative clauses. The first type of relative clause is defining relative clauses. So what is it? So the defining relative clauses complete the meaning of the main clause. Without them, sentences do not communicate their full meaning. What does it mean? It means the relative clauses in these two example sentences are necessary. Without them, we do not know which teacher you are talking about or which boyfriend you are talking about. So let's take a look at the first one. My teacher who is late is fired. So if you just say my teacher is fired, then people might ask you which one. Okay, so you need a defining relative clause here to tell us, oh, the one who is always late. Or the second example sentence, my boyfriend whom I have dated for 5 years always keeps his promise. So if you just say my boyfriend always keeps his promise, then we might ask you, are you talking about your current boyfriend or your previous boyfriends? So the relative clause here is necessary to help us identify which person you're talking about. So defining relative clauses are necessary because they help people complete the meaning, of your sentence, or help you complete the meaning of your sentence. So this is defining relative clauses. The second type of relative clauses here is non-defining relative clauses. So what are they? Non-defining relative clauses give extra information that is not necessary for the sentence to be clear. So unlike defining relative clauses, non-defining relative clauses are not necessary. And punctuation wise, you can see the difference. They are in between two commas. So my teacher who is late is fired. So in what way is this situation different from the sentence in the previous slide? In this situation, people all know who you are talking about because there is just one teacher. And for the second sentence, the situation is people are all familiar with you and your boyfriend. So when you talk about your boyfriend, then we all know whom you are talking about. So we do not need you to give extra information here. So the main difference between a defining and a non-defining relative clause is whether you are talking about someone whom people know. So we mostly use non-defining relative clauses to describe well-known figures. For example, President Tsai Ing-wen, President Joe Biden, or the previous American President Donald Trump. For these people, you do not need to give us extra information. We know who they are. We know who they are. Now let's do some practice to check whether or not you understand the difference between defining and non-defining relative clauses. So for the first one, use the computer which is in the living room. So you don't see any commas here. So this is a defining relative clauses. So is there only one computer in the room? Of course not. There are more than one. So you are using the relative clause to help us identify which one you are talking about. What about the second one? Press the red button, comma, which is on the right. So here you do see a comma before the relative pronoun. So this is a non-defining relative clause. So this clause is unnecessary, giving extra information. Without it, we can all know which button you are talking about. So there's probably only one red button. This is right. What about the next sentence? My sister who fixes computers lives in Texas. So for this one, do you see any commas? No. So this is defining relative clauses. So this person might have many sisters. Then he or she needs to give us a relative clause to help us identify which sister he or she is talking about. So I do not just have one sister. This is also right. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more examples. My stereo, which worked yesterday, doesn't work today. You see 2 commas in between. Okay, the sentence. So this is a non-defining relative clause, which means this is a sentence to give us extra information. It's not necessary. If without it, we can still know which stereo you are talking about. So is this true? It's likely that I have another stereo I can use. This is of course wrong. You just have one. Otherwise, we don't know which one you're talking about. A cell phone which remembers numbers is very convenient. So all cell phones can remember numbers. So how do we decide whether this sentence is right? You take a look at what type of relative clause it is. So no commas. So this is defining relative clause. So there are different kinds of cell phones. We're talking about the ones that can remember cell phones. So yes, all cell phones can remember numbers. Okay. What about the third one? My roommate who is afraid of computers has never been on the internet. So for this one, you see 2 commas in between the sentence. This is a non-defining relative clause. So without it, we can still know which roommate you are talking about. So I have probably more than one roommate. This is wrong. Okay, this is wrong. So hopefully through these example sentences, you know the difference between a defining and non-defining relative clauses better. Okay, relative clauses are really important because it helps us connect and combine sentences in writing. And sometimes when you find it difficult to understand a paragraph or an article, it is mostly because you cannot understand the relative clause. So if you understand the relative clause, you can break down sentences or break down an article more easily. Okay, more easily. That's why we are spending so much time going over the basic principles such as relative pronouns and the function of relative clauses and different types of relative clauses and when relative pronouns can be omitted. Okay, so if you find this section particularly difficult, don't worry, you can always go back to the previous parts to watch them again. Okay, to watch them again. So let me wrap up our lecture today. In the beginning, I share different kinds of entertainment in my life, and hopefully you can share yours, okay, on the online forum I created. It's not mandatory. If you do so, you might win a chance to get extra credits. And of course, your sharing must be in English. And we also learn different expressions with make. So what are they? What are the expressions with make we learned today? Make a good living, make the most of, make way for, make sense, make a splash, make up somebody's mind, make a difference, make an impression. Do you know how to define them in your own words? And who are the 2 artists in the article making a splash? Artist and Sophie Chan. In what way are they special? They are using social media to promote art, or they are using social media to create a family, or the word the article uses is community, for artists to compete, work, and grow together. And finally, we walk through the basic principles of relative clauses. When do we use them? How do we use them? So you need to be able to answer questions such as, when do we use relative clauses? How do we combine sentences using relative clauses? And when can the relative pronouns be omitted? And finally, what is the difference between a non-defining and defining relative clauses? Here is a to-do list for you. Please finish the lesson and go to page 145 to finish activity 2, 3, and 4 to help you process the information on relative clauses even better. And also watch the TED Talk. The TED Talk for this unit is not from the book. The one in the book is very boring and too long, so I find another interesting one about art making for you. Watch that. The link is also on Trunk class. Okay, so everyone, thank you for your time and effort in this video, and I do need to say sorry that while I was recording this video lecture, I'm having a headache, so I stutter a bit, but after drinking some coffee, I am getting better. So hopefully in my next recording, I can be more fluent. So I appreciate your understanding, and I wish you all the best in this class. Okay, see you soon.